Well, good morning to you, Alan.
Good morning, Mark. How are you doing today?
Doing
Welcome
fine.
and welcome everyone to Two Voice Devs.
Yep, it's two voice devs time.
So what have you
Well,
been up to this week?
let's see. Just recently over the weekend, I started a blog series on how to create an Alexa game from idea to code and beyond.
Oh, this is going to sound fun. I look for, I don't think we should today, but I think some other time let's dive into some stuff about what we're doing, what we're actually coding. So that sounds like it'll be fun to chat about.
Yeah, so over, I guess, the first part of this year, I released a game called Number Spies, and I decided I was going to do a whole blog series about how I came up with the idea, the different components of it, and I'll talk about different aspects, what like the language model looks like and what some of the code looks like, and drill down into some specifics on some of the different functionality and what I did to promote it, and how is it doing, is it succeeding. So it's just going to be a whole series kind of debriefing on Number Spies.
No,
So
that sounds cool. I look
yeah,
forward to reading it and chatting with you about it.
yeah. So what things have you been working on lately?
Not too much. Lots of little scattered things. One of the things that have been realizing more and more over the past couple of weeks is as I worked on my game Crosstalk, I realized that the way I was generating text for replies was overly complicated, and that there were things that I think would make some of it easier to manage,
Okay.
especially when working with multimodal environments. So I want to reply slightly differently when there's a display versus when it's a speaker versus certain other kinds of speakers that don't have some features. Um, and I want to be able to handle that better. So I started looking into how to make multivocal smarter and leverage the features that I'm already built into multivocal to kind of take them up a notch and handle those scenarios better. And then while I'm at it, integrate some other tools like speech markdown, which I keep promising
Hey,
I'm
that
going
would
to
be cool.
do any year now. Um,
Well, that was exactly going to be my next question. I'm like, so you're refactoring. That's cool. Developers like to refactor our code, keep things nice and neat. And I was going to ask you if that was going to be a change inside your code or inside of multivocal. So now I got my answer.
it is no, it is definitely going to be in multivocal. And as I've said all along, I want to take best practices and put them into multivocal so everyone can use.
Yep.
And that's why I want to put in speech markdown and some of these other ideas that I have and see where they go.
That sounds good. No, that sounds exciting.
Oh, refactoring code is always exciting.
uh,
A little intimidating sometimes, but always exciting.
Definitely easier if you have unit tests.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a little bit more exciting.
Yeah.
So, Alan, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
What time is it in New York?
Well, it is an hour earlier than when we usually record this, and I assume it is the same time there, right?
Yes,
In
so
Arizona?
it is 8:11 a.m. in Phoenix time. I don't know if people know this, but there is a time zone specifically for Phoenix, Arizona. We are always on Mountain Standard Time. So I grew up in Utah, which is the state just north of Arizona, and still have family there. And they flip-flop to daylight savings time, just like most of the rest of the country. So sometimes Arizona is on Utah time, and sometimes Arizona is on California time. So we just barely
It's
got
funny you
done.
think of it that way, as opposed to you're always in Arizona time.
Yeah, but well, because I have to change things around. Like I've got a whole slew of work meetings today that are going to be at different times than they were before,
Hmm.
because everybody else changes and we don't change.
And it's complicated. It always seems to be complicated for me because I tend to deal a lot with people in Europe, and they had their time zone change last weekend.
Oh
So,
yeah.
it's this sense of juggling, okay, am I dealing with something, and then trying to schedule things with you. It's this sense of, okay, who am I dealing with and what is their real time zone? And not just what is their time zone, what is their perception of what time is going on? And to some degree, our tools help us a lot with that, even though, it's fun watching over the history of things like calendaring systems online, how they've messed it up over the years.
Right.
But also how they're also getting better and better. So nowadays, when I schedule our meeting, I schedule it in Phoenix, Arizona time. And on my calendar, it moves around, and on yours, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's good because that's how the meeting is scheduled. So always trying to schedule things relative to a time zone and seeing how our computer systems deal with time zones and time in general is tricky. A lot of people really think, oh, I'll just convert everything to UTC and everything will be fine. And it doesn't work that way. It's a lot more complicated with that. And I think as we do more and more with voice, it becomes even more complicated. So,
well, yeah, I remember starting out, doing Alexa Dev in 2016, and fairly quickly realizing that there was no way to get a time zone. So I could get a time, right? I knew what the system time was for, where my Lambda code was running.
Right.
But I didn't know what, I had a locale for a user, so I knew that they were US English, but I didn't know it, anything more specific than that. And I just remember thinking, if I wanted my skill to welcome somebody and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I couldn't do that. There was no way I knew where that user was.
And what's annoying is that that's the sort of thing that in terms of conversation design, we're encouraged to do.
Yes.
Make things personal. And contextual. But you're right, we have few tools that help us do that.
Yeah, so finally, it took a number of, at least a year, I can't remember exactly, but it took a while of people like me speaking up and saying, seriously guys, I'm not going to evade anybody's privacy by knowing what time zone they're in. You don't have to give me exactly what city or address or zip code or anything. Just tell me a time zone, please. So that, so the solution that Amazon came up with on that is that you can make an API call. So you get your typical request in, you get the locale in as part of that request, but that doesn't have anything to do with it. You make a completely separate API call to an endpoint that Amazon gives you and ask specifically for what the time zone is, and then you get back the time zone in the format America / whatever the
standard
time zone.
Oh, that's interesting. So it gives you in terms of the standard name, not in terms of a current offset or anything like that.
No. So then you would have to use a library like Moment.js or Moment Time Zone, more likely, or another one on that same website called Luxon, or there's other ones that you can use to then pass in that time zone, and then you can format the date that you do have stored in UTC time to the current time zone, and then let people know what that time zone is. So that it's a separate step. For those cases that you need it, I guess that you would request specifically for the time zone.
Now the API call that you're making, I assume what you're passing in is either the session identifier or some other key. So
there's a token that you get that you have to that you call, and so then you get back the string for the time zone, and then you can go ahead and use it. So that was so much better because the simple use case, and then the more complicated when you want to do anything with showing like a schedule or something,
right?
Or, is your business open? All that stuff is relative to a specific time zone, and it can change with daylight savings as well. So you'll want to make sure that that's handled, and that's what that time zone name gives you. Now, that's a different experience than with Bixby. I don't know if Bixby, since it came out later, kind of learned from it, but baked right in, you can get the time zone. It's just passed as part of the request. So every request comes in, you just get the time zone. You can do with it what you
And
need.
that really just makes sense. I mean, there's not a lot of PII in a time zone. There really isn't.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that would be,
I mean,
dangerous. So
there are edge cases where, if I'm driving and I make a query at 1 minute and it gives me one time zone, and then the next minute it gives me a different time zone that I have an idea where I am, but that's still not PII. And this frustrates me because Google gives you almost no way to get it at all.
Yeah, so why don't you explain that? Because what I ended up doing is I wrapped up all three of those into a Jovo plugin, so I could just make the same call regardless of which platform I'm running on.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to do a workaround for Google because I had asked you, hey, what's the
way to deal with this? And my answer was, there isn't one.
And then like 10 minutes into your response about what to do. No, it wasn't that long, but I realized, okay, I'm not going to do that.
So how does
Google, you fix it, and then I'll do it after you fix it. But in the meantime, I'll have a workaround. But yeah, go ahead.
So the way Google handles it is they don't, and their suggestion. Well, they don't actually have any suggestions for how to do it. But the workarounds that we've come up with kind of boil down into three possible approaches. The first is, as you suggested, you can use the locale. And for some locales, that's fine. So, if the person is asking for, if the person's working in German, there's a good chance they're in Germany. And Germany has a single time zone. If they're in India, chances are they're, again, they've got a single time zone. But it falls apart in places like the US and Australia, where we don't. And in fact, it's a lousy way to do it. Simply because just because I'm speaking German doesn't actually mean I'm in Germany. So that's there, but it's a bad solution. The slightly better solution is that you can ask for the user's location, and based on their location, you can use, there are various libraries and tools where in fact, Google provides one, where you can pass it the location and it will pass back what the time zone is. The problem is, to request the location is a permissions issue.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to ask for the user's permission every single time, which, when you want a time zone, is way overkill.
Yeah, overkill was the word that came to my mind.
Yeah. The third, and this is one that I use a lot in Voodoo Drive, and I know a lot of people also use this when they're trying to do stuff that is meant to access the user's calendar as well. Since we need to access something that the user has and is working with, then sometimes that document will contain time zone information. So for example, Google Sheets lets you set the time zone for a spreadsheet.
Interesting.
And a Google Calendar has a time zone associated with your primary calendar. So if you have permission to that, you can get what the time zone is of the sheet or of the calendar, and everything will work in relation to that time zone. But in order to get access to the sheet or calendar, you need to have them log in. Now, fortunately, they just have to log in once, but you still have to have them log in, so that becomes account linking, so that's a lot of friction. And that really ends up being a lot of friction just so you could say good morning.
Yeah. No, it's not a great solution. If you're already, I guess, dealing with calendar or with the sheet as part of your main function for your voice app, okay, then great, right. You get that for free. But otherwise,
right.
Yeah, none of those are really good solutions.
No, they're terrible solutions.
Sorry to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I've been telling them for a long time now. No, they're terrible solutions. And honestly, it doesn't make any sense why we don't get this little bit of context that can go a long way to helping users. And yes. I think when we start talking about how users can input times when they report on times and dates. This gets even more important and even more complicated about why it's so important. So let me ask you, so I guess that leads into the next related bit of information.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before we get there, why don't you talk a little bit about your Jovo library?
Okay, sure. So the Jovo plugin, if you go to the Jovo website, there's a marketplace there, and amongst the marketplace, you'll go and you'll be able to find this Jovo Timezone plugin. Or you can go to GitHub. There's a community out there I created called Jovo-Community, and it's one of the projects there. So you could come join the project. But what I decided to do is, because there's various different ways of accessing time zone based on which platform you're on, and I'm trying to create a cross-platform solution so that I can do something consistently regardless of which platform it's on. Same code, then the plugin has a separate function call after you enable the plugin to get the time zone. And what that does, it determines if it's Bixby, it's just going to return back the time zone that it's as part of the request. Nothing really surprising there. If it's Alexa, it's going to go ahead and make that API call, and then it's going to cache it in session. There's session state that gets round tripped with the data, so that later on in the conversation, if you need the time zone again and you call that same function, it's not going to make the API call. Instead, it's going to use the cached time zone. So there's a little bit of efficiency there. For that side of things. If for some reason the API call fails, there's an error at that endpoint, which could happen probably rarely, then there is a default locale that it will fall back to. Then on the Google side of things, I've just said, okay, you've got the locale, and you can use that default locale, and that's what you get. But then I decided to go ahead and add in country code based locale. Mm-hmm. So what happens is there was, depending on what locale it was, it would sniff the country portion out of that, and then you could have defaults per each country in your code and say, this is the time zone to use if the country code is this. So that's the solution I ended up doing for Google. It's not great, but then in this particular skill that uses that, because it could be released in UK or Australia or someplace, then it also tells you the time zone. So it says, this is things going to happen at this date and time and this time zone. So at least it reports back, if you're someplace else and you happen to get the wrong time zone, at least maybe it's close, and it tells you which time zone it's using.
Yeah. So when you're using the time zone, how do you use the time zone that your library has picked up? It stores it in one of the Jovo variables, or?
Well, so it returns it back from an API call, but then it also caches it in session.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's part
just
of the
an
API
API
variables
call.
that you have.
So yeah, it's a plugin function call, which would either immediately return back the value or make an API call and return back the value.
Oh, okay. So
and then you would use it in a library like Moment.js or Luxon or one of the other ones to actually convert your UTC time into the time zone, and then you get to format it for display or for being spoken.
Okay, now that's good when sending something out. When we're replying to the user with a time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do we handle user input? How do you handle user input on the Alexa side when they're saying 3 o'clock or tomorrow at noon or something?
So there's a couple of different built-in slot types that allow you to get the date or the time, and so that's what you end up using to get that portion of it, and then you use the time zone from this API call, and together you use those as inputs. So for example, one of the APIs that you can set are reminders. So you can say, like if you were talking to Alexa directly, you could say, Alexa, set a reminder at this time, and it will ask you like, what's the reminder for? And so you can do that in two different ways. You can either specify a relative time, like say set a timer in 10 minutes or in 2 hours or 3 days or from now or whatever. So it's a relative time, at which point you can just use a time span. and specify it, and you don't need time zone at all because it's just relative to whatever right now is. The other time is like if you wanted to say this is an absolute time, so then you would use the date and time slot stuff to get the input value. You would use the time zone from this plugin, and then you would put those together and format the request for an absolute time span. So like if I want to say, I want to set a reminder for next Tuesday at 8 a.m., then that's a very specific time that you want this reminder to happen as opposed to a relative time.
So I have a pile of questions related to this one. So let's start with the processing the input part of it. So for the slot types that let you say something like tomorrow at 8 a.m., mm-hmm. what input do you get? How does that slot value appear to your skill?
So when you're asking for like I'm trying to think about this. Depending on what you say, then you would get back a string that represents what the date is, or it could be like a time span.
So it's an ISO date or time span.
Yeah.
Format. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so it converts the yesterday into a date. It converts the last week or last mm-hmm. Tuesday into a date.
And this is going to sound weird, but it's almost a leading question. How does that handle time zones?
It doesn't. It just uses.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, and the reason I asked that is because I was playing extensively with how both Action Builder and Dialogflow handle this, and they handle it in different ways, of course, in what they give back. But both of them handle things like tomorrow at 3 o'clock or tomorrow at 8 o'clock mm-hmm. relative to UTC, which doesn't work well if you're not in UTC. So like if it's evening here and it's the middle of the night, it is already the next day in UTC. And then I say tomorrow at 8 o'clock, it then advances it one day later in UTC and finds the correct time, which is a day later than it would be here on the East Coast.
Yeah, because interesting, because like UTC time is like 5 p.m. Arizona time is when the date transition happens to the next date. So you know what? I don't think I've ever hit that nuance. So maybe I don't know the answer to that.
I was playing around with it a lot, and one of the things that I found was weird is that it was reporting things in terms of UTC, at least on the Action Builder side. Mm-hmm. The Dialogflow side was even stranger.
Oh no.
Well, but in some ways it was stranger in a in a not necessarily bad way. One of the things you can do in a Dialogflow agent when you build it is set a time zone for it. So you can say this agent runs on East Coast time, or in America, New York.
Yeah, interesting.
So when you tell it to do something, when you give it a date time or a relative time like tomorrow at 8 a.m., it treats that relative to New York time, if I set it in terms of the New York time zone. The problem is you can't set that time zone on a per session basis. You can only set it on a per agent basis.
Interesting.
So this works well if you're, if you have a store or a series of stores that are running, in New York or on the East Coast, and you want to know hours and you want to say, what time are you open tomorrow? It will know when the right tomorrow is. But it doesn't work well if you've got a fleet of stores around the world and somebody in Japan is asking when you're open tomorrow, because it's answering based on New York time.
Yeah, that is an odd duck.
it is at least better than everything being in UTC, and worse, having no way to know. One of the problems with this is that you've got no way to know whether the user said something like tomorrow at 8 p.m. or just said 8 p.m., which may or may not refer to the same day or may not.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, at any rate, the other interesting bit is that Dialogflow does report things in terms of an ISO date time, and it's always a date time, while Action Builder is a little more nuanced. So it may report, it gives you back a structure that has year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds, nanoseconds. And it only gives you fields that may be relevant.
Uh-huh.
So if I ask for 5 p.m., it will just give me hours, minutes, seconds, nanoseconds, and let me figure out what the right day for that is.
So it's like those cooking shows where you create something, you don't have time to do the whole thing, and so you call it a deconstructed taco or something.
Oh, yes.
Where you have to assemble it yourself.
Yes. And, it's not necessarily difficult, but
just another step.
It's just another step. And the other advantage is some cases it makes sense because it's telling you, we're just giving you the time because that's all the user told us about. We're not going to try to figure out what the date is. We're just giving you the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an ISO format for that as well. I know that, but the other interesting bit that I discovered while fiddling around is that with Dialogflow, if you say something like tomorrow, it will give you tomorrow's date at noon. I'm not sure why it decided to pick noon instead of midnight, but okay. So there are interesting quirks about how all of the Google ones work. And unfortunately, some of those quirks make it almost impossible to use. Like there's no way to say, there's no way to reliably understand what tomorrow at 8 p.m. means. So, the best you can do is make a guess and then confirm with the user that that's really what they meant.
Yeah, so this is interesting because I've been playing around with some parsing of strings myself using other libraries. Like Microsoft has a series of recognizers for parsing out well-known types, one of those being dates. And so you can do things like yesterday or last week or things, and you can get, like if you say yesterday, you get back a specific date, but if you say last week, you get back a date range.
Oh, that's nice.
Which gives you back, a start and end. Instead of just a value, it gives you a start and an end. But then if you say like from a specific date, like from yesterday, then it actually gives you back a range, but it only gives you the start time.
The opening range, yeah.
Yeah, the opening range because it's undetermined, I guess, on the closing side of things. But
see, that's interesting. Well, I would also have guessed that if you said yesterday, that it would have given you a range of midnight to midnight yesterday.
Yeah, no. So it gives, if I wanted to turn around and use that date like yesterday in some sort of a query, then I would have to then format the start and end myself because I would get back just a single value, which would be just the date portion of time. Yeah.
Very interesting.
So it is. Playing
with, but this is what I mean when I said, people think, I can just store it as UTC, and it's complicated.
Yeah, there is more to it. Yeah, and it's such a vital part of making skills better, either more personable or just functional, depending on if you need to do anything with date input or output.
Right, and actually that goes to the other set of questions that I had, and that's, so you were talking about setting a reminder.
Yes.
How so that's actually accessing Alexa's built-in reminder functionality? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool. That is not something we can do on the Google side. The closest we have there is we can send a notification, but that's using the notification
Yeah,
system,
which is
not
separate.
not the reminder and timer system.
Yeah, and so for example, in Number Spies, you can set a reminder. You can only go on a mission every so often, like every 90 minutes or something like that. So you could choose to set a reminder so that the system will remind you to come back in 90 minutes or whatever, or some future time to come back and play Number Spies. So it's interesting that you can plug into that functionality. The current game I'm working on also takes advantage of that functionality of setting a reminder to come back. And
You keep teasing this game. I'm
I
looking
know
forward to this
I
one.
do, but as we were talking about it, I'm like, well, right now it's built with Jovo and dialogue flow, and so I'm trying to decide if I need to rewrite that part in Action Builder before I release it, or if I should just release it with dialogue flow. So I don't know. I did some more work on that this weekend too, but so I don't know. It'll be sooner or later that we can start beta testing it back and forth, and you can give me some feedback on it.
But no, the ability to launch timers like that and to launch reminders right from inside the action, it's great the sort of things that you can do with that. I mean, you can easily imagine a cooking skill or action that says, cook this for 10 minutes, and then you don't need to explicitly say, set an alarm for 10 minutes to remind me to take it out of the oven.
Yeah.
You can just say, go ahead and start that timer. And it knows that means that's how long it needs to be. And that's the reminder that it needs to give you at the end of that time.
Yeah. So you actually do both, right? Timers and reminders are different things on Alexa where, a timer is a certain amount of time starting now.
Yeah.
I guess you can name timers too, but it's not quite the same. I don't know. There is kind of a blurry line, I guess, if you think about it, between timers and reminders.
Well, do you also have alarms?
I don't know that you can set alarms through a skill.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember now. I haven't come across that. I'll have to go look now. Now you got me curious.
See, I knew about setting timers. I didn't know about reminders. And but yeah, on the Google side, we've got timers and alarms and reminders, and they all have similar functionality, but not quite the same.
Yeah, and we've talked about permissions too, because in order to set a timer or set a reminder, you have to have permissions. And those are actually few cases where Alexa gives you the ability to ask a voice prompt with, do you give permission? So
that's good.
Yeah. So that's nice on that point. And it's actually just a one time, as far as I understand, probably one time per skill. I haven't really explored that, but because there's that settings page you can go back to and toggle it off if you don't want to keep the permission that you gave a voice permission to. Well, fun. So it's a new week with a new time zone for some people. For everybody else, it still affects me. Even though we don't change, it still affects me. But
that's always the thing about time zones, is that it always affects us. And in some ways, it's good that I've seen a lot of people say, we should just get rid of time zones and leave everything in UTC. And I don't think those people realize how people sleep and wake, and having this notion of time zones helps understand what people may be doing at that time.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you could use what time zone you're in based on, you could customize a skill based on, what time the person's accessing, not just a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but kind of like, oh, this is the morning routine part of my skill, or this is the evening routine part.
Right.
Or,
for medical ones where you need to remind people to take a pill twice daily, you have, when are the good times to do that? If you are, helping people with their diet, to record food, again, knowing roughly where they are in their schedule helps you provide additional context in guiding them through the rest of the day, or what they should be doing tomorrow, or, having this notion, even if it's a rough notion, of where a person is in their day, in their daily routine, really helps a lot in personalizing it.
Yeah, it should just be one of those things that are easily accessible for developers, so that conversation designers can just incorporate that as part of the base functionality that's part of your voice app.
Yep.
So
I certainly agree.
Well, so spring forward, fall back now, I guess. To all those people,
we are done with that for a few more months. Right?
I know they changed it. It used to be like always April and October, and then they've started it sooner and ended it later. So pretty soon it will just be December. That's standard time, and the rest of it will be, I don't know.
There are reasons why. I mean, I've heard people advocate that we should stick to standard time or stick to daylight saving time, and I think there are good reasons why, at least in northern parts of the countries, that's a bad idea. I understand why Arizona decided to keep it all one time zone. That actually does make sense for places more in the south. The further you get north, the more you really do want to have these differentiated time periods. It really does help with, I mean, the fact that this morning, the sun was up and in the sky earlier in the day, really does help with how people's mental moods work, how we function during the day.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I guess I can see it. I'm just so used to not having it and not happy to not having to change it. But then I still have to adjust all my mental thinking about when things are happening, but that's all right.
Yep. No, I get you. Anyway, so I think we would love to hear from people how they handle time and how they deal with time, and what things they wish they could do if they had a better sense of what the time and the time zone is in their skills and actions.
Yeah, would definitely like to hear if you've got some better approaches or solutions or a different library that you're using. Sure love to hear about it.
We'd love to hear it. We'd love to talk with you about it. We'd love to share it on the show. So thanks everyone for joining us. We are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.